The oldest written document that lists the kings of Earth does not begin with us. It begins with 8 rulers who reigned for 241,000 years. And then it says the world was wiped clean. The Sumerians wrote this down as history, not as myth, as a record. You came here because someone told you the Sumerians said we are the 7th civilization. I'm going to show you exactly what the tablets say. And the truth is stranger than the version you were sold, because the number isn't the point. What the scribes were tracking is the point. They were counting something that ended over and over and over. And almost no one teaches what they actually wrote, because the moment you read it carefully, the official timeline of human history stops feeling complete. By the end of this, you won't be able to look at the phrase "the beginning of civilization" the same way again. In 1922, an expedition in southern Iraq pulled a small clay prism out of the ground at a site called Larsa. It's the size of your hand, 4 sides covered in cuneiform. Today, it sits in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, catalogued as the Weld-Blundell prism, and it contains the most quietly disturbing document in the ancient world, the Sumerian King List. It is, on the surface, an administrative text, a ledger. It records who held kingship in Mesopotamia, city by city, going backward in time. Most of it is mundane. Dynasties of Kish, of Uruk, of Ur, with reigns measured in years and decades. The kind of bookkeeping you'd expect. But the document doesn't start there. Before the first human-scale dynasty, before the recorded kings, there is a separate section, a different kind of entry, and it opens with one line that the scribes treated as literal fact. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. What follows is a list of kings who ruled before a flood destroyed everything. 8 of them, reigning for spans of time no human body could survive. And here is the central question this entire video is built around. The question academics and alternative researchers have argued over for a century. Why would a civilization that kept careful, sober records about everything else write down as history that the world had been ruled and erased before them? What were they actually counting? Let's read it. Not paraphrased. The structure itself. The King List names 5 cities that held kingship before the flood. In order: Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sipar, Shurupak. 5 cities, 8 kings, reigning a total of 241,200 years. And then the line every translator renders almost identically. The flood swept over. The reign lengths are the part that stops you. In Eridu, the first king, Alulim, ruled 28,800 years. His successor, Al-Algar, 36,000. At Bad Tibira, a king named Enmenluana ruled 43,200 years. The shortest reign in the entire pre-flood section, Ubaratutu at Shurupak, is still 18,600 years. Now, the easy reaction is to dismiss this. Obviously, no one ruled for 43,000 years. But notice what serious scholars noticed. These aren't random fantasy numbers. They are built from the Sumerian counting system. Base 60, using 2 repeating units. The Sar equal to 3,600 and the Nir equal to 600. Every reign is a clean multiple. This isn't a poet inventing big numbers for effect. This is a scribe applying a counting system deliberately, mathematically, to a span of time he believed stretched back before the flood. Here's where I have to be precise with you, because precision is the whole point. The man who produced the definitive scholarly translation of this text was Thorkild Jacobsen of the University of Chicago in 1939. Jacobsen did not believe these were real reigns. To him and to the field that followed, including Samuel Noah Kramer, the great Sumerologist who spent his life translating these tablets, the King List was political. A document written to make whatever dynasty commissioned it look like the latest link in an unbroken chain reaching back to heaven itself. The purpose of the text, scholars argue, was to legitimize rulers, not to document actual history. That is the academic consensus, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But hold on to two facts that the consensus does not dissolve. First, the Sumerians chose to anchor their political legitimacy in a catastrophe. Their entire claim to power depended on remembering that the world had ended once and started again. Second, this same flood, with this same survivor, appears across multiple independent Mesopotamian texts. The Eridu Genesis, written in Sumerian, the Epic of Atrahasis in Akkadian, the flood tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The survivor changes name, Ziusudra, Atrahasis, Utnapishtim, but the event does not. A civilization wiped away by water, a handful who lived through it, and a world that had to begin again. So the question sharpens. The skeptics are probably right that no one ruled for 28,000 years. But why does an entire culture's literature keep circling the same memory? That what came before was lost. For most of the 20th century, the answer was simple. It's a flood myth. Every culture has one. Move on. Then geology complicated the story. Roughly 12,900 years ago, the planet did something violent. After thousands of years of steady warming as the last ice age released its grip, the climate slammed backward almost overnight. Geologists call it the Younger Dryas, a sudden, severe drop in temperature beginning around 12,900 years ago and lasting until roughly 11,600 years ago. And this isn't fringe science. It's textbook climatology, drawn from Greenland ice cores and ocean sediment. What happened to the people living through it was brutal. In North America, the great animals vanished. Mastodons, camels, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats. The human culture archaeologists call the Clovis people, the dominant culture of the continent, set aside their heavy spears and effectively disappeared from the record. At least 35 entire groups of large mammals went extinct in North America alone. Whatever the Younger Dryas was, it functioned exactly like the King List describes its flood. A hard line in the earth, with one world below it and a different world above. Now, why it happened is where I have to flag the boundary between established science and contested theory. Because this is where most channels lie to you. The mainstream explanation is meltwater. A vast lake of glacial meltwater, dammed by ice, burst into the North Atlantic and shut down the ocean currents that carry warmth north. That is the standard view. But there's a second hypothesis, and you need to know its status. In 2007, a team of researchers proposed, in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, that an extraterrestrial impact, a comet or asteroid airburst around 12,900 years ago, triggered the cooling and the extinctions. Soon after publication, several scientists reported they could not replicate the key evidence, and much of the scientific community rejected the hypothesis. It remains a real, ongoing scientific debate. Not settled fact, and not the consensus. I'm telling you that openly because anyone who presents the comet as proven is selling you something. Here is what is not in dispute, and it's enough. A global, civilization-ending climate catastrophe happened in the window of human memory, at almost exactly the moment our ancestors were watching the world change. The flood stories aren't describing nothing. They're describing the kind of event we have now found in the ice. Step back far enough and a shape appears. The King List doesn't describe one ending, it describes a cycle. Kingship descends, a city holds it, the city falls. Kingship moves on. Eridu falls, and it passes to Bad Tibira. Bad Tibira falls, it passes to Larak. Again and again, the same verb. The city was abandoned, the kingship was carried away. The flood is just the largest instance of a rhythm the scribes saw running through everything. Rise, hold, collapse, transfer. And the deeper you go into the actual archaeology of Mesopotamia, the more that rhythm turns out to be real. The cities on that list were buried and rebuilt repeatedly. Eridu, named as the first city, the place where kingship began, is one of the oldest continuously occupied settlements ever excavated. Layer upon layer of construction, stacked on the ruins of the layer before. The Sumerians weren't imagining collapse, they were standing on top of it, living in cities built on the rubble of older cities whose builders they no longer knew. This is the honest core of the 7 civilizations idea. And now I'll address the number directly, because I promised you the truth about it. The clean claim that the Sumerians said we are the 7th advanced civilization is a modern interpretation. Popularized in the alternative history world, most famously by the writer Zecharia Sitchin. And I want to be exact about Sitchin's standing. He was not an academic Sumerologist. Professional translators of these tablets reject his readings. When I mention him, I'm citing him as the source of the popular theory, not as evidence. That distinction is the difference between research and fiction, and this channel stays on the right side of it. But strip away Sitchin's embellishments, and something defensible remains, written in the tablets themselves. The Sumerians believed they were not the first. They believed kingship, civilization, order, the knowledge of cities had existed before, been destroyed, and been handed down to them across a catastrophe. Whether you count 5 cities, 8 kings, or 7 ages, the structure of their worldview is identical. We are a continuation. Something complete came before us. It ended. We are what came after. So, did they say anything to us about what comes next? This is where I have to be the most careful, because this is where the temptation to invent is strongest. So let me separate what the texts say from what people wish they said. What the texts do not contain. There is no Sumerian prophecy naming a date for our destruction. No tablet says the 7th civilization will fall in such and such a year. Anyone who tells you otherwise is fabricating. And you should close that video. What the texts do contain is subtler, and, I'd argue, heavier. In the Epic of Atrahasis, the Akkadian flood account, the catastrophe is not random. The gods send the flood because humanity has become too numerous, too loud, too disruptive. The text uses the image of a world grown so noisy the gods can no longer rest. The destruction is framed as a correction, a world that overgrew its limits and was reset. And the survival in these stories always hinges on the same thing: a single warning heard by one person who listened. In the Eridu Genesis, the survivor, Ziusudra, is a king who is warned of the coming flood and told to preserve life through it. The knowledge of the world before is carried across the disaster by someone who paid attention, while everyone else did not. That's the closest thing to a message the Sumerians left. Not a date, a pattern of meaning. Civilizations fall when they stop listening. And what survives is whatever was deliberately preserved and carried across the gap. The warning isn't a prophecy about the future. It's a description of how endings work, written by people who clearly believed they were living on the far side of one. So let's return to the question in the title, and let's answer it honestly. Were there literally 6 advanced civilizations before ours? The Sumerian King List does not prove that. What it proves is something I'd argue is more unsettling, that the oldest record keepers we know of were already convinced they lived in the shadow of lost worlds. The first people to write history down believed history had already ended, at least once, before them. And here's where the ground genuinely shifts beneath the mainstream story. For over a century, the textbook timeline was simple. Agriculture comes first, then villages, then, slowly, the surplus and organization that make monuments possible. Civilization was supposed to be a staircase, climbed one careful step at a time. Hunter-gatherers could not build anything grand. That was the rule. Then, in southeastern Turkey, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt began excavating a hill called Göbekli Tepe. Radiocarbon dating of its lowest levels places the earliest construction around 11,600 years ago. Built, in other words, in the immediate aftermath of the Younger Dryas, at almost exactly the moment the flood memory cultures point back to. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars, 3 to 6 meters tall, weighing 40 to 60 tons, carved with foxes and boars and birds, and the detail that broke the textbook. It was built by hunter-gatherers. There's no evidence of domesticated plants or animals. These were supposed to be people too simply organized to build anything like this. And yet, erecting 7-ton pillars would have required hundreds of coordinated workers, all needing to be fed and housed. I'll be fair to the science here too. Göbekli Tepe is not a lost advanced civilization, and not every archaeologist even agrees it was a temple. Some now argue it was a settlement, but the bare fact stands, and it is enormous. 12,000 years ago, people we had written off as primitive were organizing, engineering, and building on a monumental scale, right after a global catastrophe. The staircase was wrong. Complexity was already there at the very bottom of the record, exactly where the Sumerians said a previous world had been. So when the King List says civilization descended, that it came from somewhere, fully formed, after a flood, that ancient claim suddenly rhymes with the dirt. We keep digging up evidence of sophistication older than the story allows, and the people who lived closest to that boundary, the Sumerians, told us plainly what they thought had happened on the other side of it. A world, complete, erased, if they were right, even in outline. If what we call the dawn of civilization was actually the recovery, then we are not the beginning of anything. We are the part of the story that came after the part nobody wrote down. There's one last detail I haven't told you, and I saved it deliberately. The Sumerians did not believe the flood was the end of the cycle. In their record, kingship descends from heaven a second time after the water recedes, and the whole machine starts again. Cities rising, holding, falling. The kingship carried onward. To them, the catastrophe was never a conclusion. It was a hinge. One turn in something that had turned before and would turn again. Which means the most honest reading of their record isn't that we are the seventh, or the second, or the last. It's that we are somewhere in the middle of a sentence, copying down our own kings, our own achievements, our own certainties, exactly the way the scribes of Eridu once did. On tablets they were sure would be read forever. They were the most advanced people of their world. They wrote everything down, and almost all of what they knew is gone, recovered only by accident. A hand-sized prism pulled out of the dirt in 1922. So here is the question I want you to sit with. Not, were there 6 civilizations before us? The question is this: when the next line of this record gets written by whoever digs us up, what will they decide we were the recovery from? And what, exactly, do you imagine we are quietly preserving right now to be carried across the gap to them?